The day my half-sister screamed at me in the middle of my father's wake, I was still wearing the hospital bracelet on my wrist. I hadn't taken it off. Couldn't bring myself to. It felt like the only proof I had that any of it was real. That 3 weeks earlier I'd been lying in a hospital bed, being told my appendix had nearly burst. That my dad had driven 4 hours in the middle of the night to sit beside me. That he'd held my hand and said, "You scared me half to death, baby girl." Those were the last real words he said to me before everything went wrong. His name was Randall. My dad, 58 years old, sharp as a tack, still jogged 3 miles every morning. He wasn't supposed to get sick. He wasn't supposed to deteriorate in 6 weeks and be gone before I'd figured out what was happening. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name doesn't matter as much as this story does. What matters is that I'm 31 years old. I work as a paralegal in Raleigh, North Carolina, and until the spring of this year, I thought my biggest problem was that I was perpetually single and my apartment had a mold situation in the bathroom that my landlord kept ignoring. That was my life. Small problems, manageable ones. My dad remarried when I was 19. I was away at college when it happened. Not far, just 2 hours, and he called me to tell me he'd met someone. Her name was Paulette. She had 2 kids from her first marriage. A son named Crispin, who was 24 at the time, and a daughter, Lee, who was 22. I'd met them exactly 3 times before the wedding. They were polite in the way that people are polite when they're deciding how much they need to bother with you. I told myself it was fine. Dad was happy. Paulette made him laugh in a way I hadn't seen since my mom passed when I was 14. So I smiled at the wedding. I danced with Crispin, even though he stepped on my foot twice. And I told myself we'd figure out how to be a family eventually. Eventually never came. It wasn't dramatic, the distance between us. It was just quiet. Holidays where I felt like a guest. Dinners where Paulette and her kids had inside jokes that went back 20 years, and I sat there smiling at things I didn't understand. Dad would catch my eye sometimes, and I could see he knew. But he never said anything. He was the kind of man who believed that if you were patient enough, things smoothed themselves out. Crispin was the worst of it, though not in any way I could ever prove. He was charming. That's the thing about people like him. They're deeply, effortlessly charming in exactly the ways that make you feel crazy when you try to explain what's wrong. He'd make a comment at dinner that landed just slightly off, and when I'd react, he'd laugh and say, "Oh, come on, you know I'm joking." He started calling me princess when I was 23, and when I asked him not to, he acted like I'd accused him of something terrible. "It's a term of endearment," he said. "Some people would take that as a compliment." He managed Dad's investment portfolio. That part came later, around 4 years ago, when Dad started having some minor health issues and decided he wanted someone he trusted handling his finances. He asked Crispin. I remember feeling a twist of something in my stomach when Dad told me, but I pushed it down. What was I supposed to say? Don't trust your stepson. Based on what? A feeling? So I said nothing, and I watched. 3 months ago, Dad called me on a Tuesday evening. It was the kind of call he made sometimes, no particular reason, just checking in. But about 10 minutes into the conversation, something shifted. He got quieter. "How's work?" he asked, and then before I could answer, "Are you happy, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Dad. Are you okay?" He paused. "I've just been tired lately." Probably nothing. I asked if he'd seen a doctor. He said he had. His regular physician, Dr. Hadaway, had run some blood work and said everything looked normal. I told him to rest more. He said he would. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important, and when I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with my phone in my hand for a long moment, feeling like something was wrong without being able to name it. 2 weeks later, Paulette called me to say Dad had collapsed in the backyard. They'd taken him to Mercy Regional. By the time I got there, he was conscious but disoriented, and the doctors were running tests. Crispin was already at the hospital when I arrived, standing in the hallway outside Dad's room, with his arms crossed and a look on his face I can only describe as managed concern, like he'd practiced it. "He's going to be okay," Crispin said when he saw me. "What happened?" We don't know yet. Paulette found him on the ground. He shook his head. It's a lot for her. She's really shaken up. I noticed he didn't mention that it was a lot for me. The doctors eventually attributed it to low blood pressure, possible cardiac irregularity, kept him for 2 nights, and sent him home with new medication and instructions to follow up with a cardiologist. Dad came home looking smaller than I remembered him. That scared me more than anything. I started driving up to see him more often, every weekend, then every few days. Paulette was warm enough. She brought me coffee and asked after my job and said things like, "You're so good to come all this way." But Crispin would find small ways to make his presence known. He had a key to the house. He came and went whenever he liked. He'd started helping Dad manage some paperwork, which I discovered when I noticed a folder on the kitchen table with my dad's name on it and asked what it was. "Just some estate planning documents," Crispin said, from the couch, where he was watching something on his phone. "Nothing you need to worry about. He's my father. I think I'm allowed to know what documents he's signing." He looked at me over his phone. He asked me to handle it. That's what handling it looks like. Dad came in from the hallway at that point, shuffling a little, and the conversation ended. But I drove home that night with my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The person who helped me see clearly was a woman named Orali. Orali had been my dad's neighbor for 11 years. She was 73, retired, and had opinions about everything from city council decisions to the proper way to make biscuits. She was also sharp in a way that made me feel both seen and slightly nervous, which I mean as a genuine compliment. She'd watched my dad grow thinner and quieter over the past few months, and she'd been watching Crispin's visits with an expression she described to me as suspicious old woman energy. I ran into her one morning when I was leaving Dad's house, and she touched my arm and said, "You have a minute?" We sat on her porch. She brought out sweet tea, and she told me that 2 weeks ago she'd seen Crispin in my dad's kitchen through the back window, that she hadn't meant to look, that she'd just glanced over, and that he was doing something with Dad's medications, moving bottles around, not in a panicked way, in a careful way. "He saw me looking," she said, and he smiled and waved, like it was nothing. I sat with that for a long moment. "Did you say anything to my dad?" I tried. "But he keeps making excuses for the boy. He's just helping me keep track. You know how he is." I did. I knew exactly how he was. My dad believed the best of people to a degree that had always been one of his most beautiful qualities. It was only now occurring to me how that quality could be used against him. I went back inside, and while Crispin was occupied talking to Paulette in the living room, I quietly photographed every medication bottle in my father's bathroom. Then I called a pharmacist friend of mine from college, Yevgenia, who has the most encyclopedic knowledge of drug interactions of anyone I've ever met, and I sent her the photos. She called me back in 45 minutes. "Where did you say these were from?" she asked. "My dad's bathroom." "Why?" "Because one of these bottles has been refilled very recently. The label's dated last week, but the pill count is way off. There should be 30 pills for a 30-day supply. I can see from the photo there's maybe 15 in there." She paused. "The other thing is, this particular medication, if you take it inconsistently, too little one day, too much the next, it causes exactly the kind of cardiac symptoms you described. Dizziness, fatigue, irregular heartbeat." I had to sit down on the floor of my car. "Is it possible," I said carefully, "that someone could be doing this on purpose?" Another pause. "Tampered medications are taken very seriously. If you have a reason to believe that's happening, you need to go to someone with authority to investigate, not just a pharmacist over the phone." I thanked her and sat in my car for a long time. The other thing I'd been starting to piece together was the money. I'm a paralegal. Wills and estates aren't my specialty, but I know more than the average person about what documents look like and what they mean. When I finally got a look at the paperwork Crispin had been managing, not by snooping, but because Dad, in a rare moment of clarity, handed me a folder and said, "Can you look at this for me, baby girl? Some of the numbers aren't adding up. What I found made me feel sick. Dad had 3 investment accounts. According to the statements I was looking at, 2 of them had lost significant value in the past 18 months. But more than that, there were transfer records I didn't understand. Amounts moving out of the accounts to a holding company I didn't recognize. Bradwick Capital Partners. No explanation in the notes. No obvious investment purpose. I called a friend who worked in financial compliance. Her name is Nomi. We went to law school prep together for about 6 months before I pivoted to paralegal work. I sent her photos of the statement. She called back the next morning. "This holding company," she said. "Do you know who owns it?" "No." I ran a quick search. It was registered in Delaware about 2 years ago. The listed director is a C. Burwell. She let that land. Crispin's last name was Burwell. I don't know how I drove to my dad's house after that phone call without getting in an accident. I was so focused on keeping my breathing even that I ran a yellow light and didn't notice until I was through the intersection. By the time I got there, Crispin was already inside. He was in the kitchen, making coffee like he owned the place, and he looked up when I walked in and said, "Hey, Princess!" "Don't call me that, Ma." He set down the coffee pot with a slow, deliberate motion. "What's wrong with you?" "I want to talk to my dad." "Alone. He's resting." I didn't ask for a schedule update. I asked to see my dad. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, exactly. More like calculation. "You've been going through his papers." He showed them to me. "His choice." He doesn't always make the best choices lately. That's why I'm helping him manage things. "You're helping yourself," I said, "and I think we both know it." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. He set down the mug he was holding very slowly, and then he crossed his arms and smiled at me in a way that made my skin go cold. "Be very careful," he said, "about what you think you know." That was when Paulette walked in, and Crispin's expression switched back to warm and easy like someone had flipped a dial. He turned to her and said, "She's upset about something. Maybe you can talk to her." And then he walked out of the kitchen like none of it had happened. Paulette looked at me. I could see that she knew something was wrong. I could also see in the slight tension around her mouth that she wasn't going to ask. I went to my dad's room. He was awake, propped up on his pillows, looking out the window at the backyard. When he saw me, he smiled. The real one, the one that went all the way up to his eyes, and I had to press my lips together to keep myself from crying. "Hey, baby girl." "Hey, Dad." I sat on the edge of his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Been better." He looked at me for a moment. "You have your worried face on." "I found some things in those papers you showed me," I said. "I need you to listen to me carefully, okay? And I need you to trust me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been wondering when you'd come to me." I looked at him. "I'm not as confused as I've been letting on," he said softly. "Some days are worse than others. But I've had suspicions for a while, about the accounts, about the pills." He closed his eyes. "I didn't want to believe it." "We have to act, Dad. We can't wait." "I know." He reached out and took my hand. His grip was still strong. "What do we do?" We started with the attorney. His name was Mr. Beecham, not Crispin's man, but someone Dad had used years ago, before the remarriage, a semi-retired estate attorney who worked out of an office that smelled like old books and still had a fax machine. I called him on a Thursday morning, and we drove there together the following Monday, Dad and I, without telling anyone where we were going. Mr. Beecham listened. He looked at the financial documents. He asked a lot of quiet, careful questions. Then he referred us to someone at the State Securities Commission and also gave us the name of a detective he trusted, a woman named Garza who worked financial crimes and had, as he put it, a nose for exactly this kind of thing. Detective Garza was the one who suggested we not tip Crispin off yet. She wanted to build a picture first. We gave her access to everything: the statements, the transfer records, the medication photographs, Yevgenia's informal assessment. She was thorough and calm in the way that very competent people often are, and talking to her for the first time felt like being able to breathe again after holding it in for weeks. "Is my dad in physical danger right now?" I asked her in that first meeting. She took a moment. I think it's wise to assume so, yes. I'd recommend he have a new physician, someone outside the circle, look at his current medication regimen, and I'd recommend changing where his medications are stored. I drove to a pharmacy 2 towns over the next day and bought a small lockbox. We put everything in it. I kept the key on my keychain. Crispin came by the house 4 days later and couldn't find the medications. I happened to be there when it happened. I'd made a point of being there, and I watched him look in the bathroom cabinet, open the kitchen drawer, check the side table in Dad's room, all with that same practiced calm. Then he looked at me, and this time the calculation in his eyes was sharper. "Where are the pills?" he said. "What pills?" "Your dad's medication. It wasn't in the usual place." "Maybe he moved it." I met his gaze. "He's allowed to do that." We stared at each other for a long moment. Then he left. I called Detective Garza the moment his car pulled out of the driveway. It took 3 more weeks. I know that sounds like a long time, but a case that will hold up has to be built carefully. And Detective Garza was building something that would hold. She worked with the Securities Commission on the financial side and coordinated with a medical investigator who examined Dad's prescription records and found documented evidence of dosage irregularities going back 8 months. 8 months. I kept coming back to that number. While I'd been going about my regular life, making coffee in my apartment and sitting in traffic, and watching things on Netflix, someone had been slowly and methodically trying to hurt my father. I don't have words for that feeling, exactly. It's too big to fit neatly into a sentence. It sits in your chest like something dense and cold. The financial picture was worse than I'd suspected. Crispin had transferred just over $240,000 into Bradwick Capital Partners over 18 months, in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags. He'd also altered the beneficiary designations on 2 of the accounts. Changes that, if Dad had died without anyone catching it, would have directed a significant portion of his estate to Paulette, and through her, to Crispin. Lee, Paulette's daughter, the quieter one, contacted me the day before the arrests. She called from a number I didn't recognize, and when I picked up, she said very fast, "I need you to know I didn't know about any of it. I need you to know that." Her voice was shaking. I didn't say much. I listened. "He's my brother," I said. "Oh," she said. "But I swear I didn't know." "Okay," I said again. "I meant it, actually." She sounded genuinely wrecked, and I've never had the appetite for punishing people for their relatives' choices. The arrests happened on a Wednesday. I wasn't there. Detective Garza told me not to be, said it would be cleaner for everyone. But she called me afterward, and she said, they found additional evidence at his apartment. This was planned. He was thorough, but not thorough enough. Crispin was charged with financial elder abuse, fraud, and 1 count related to the medication tampering that I can't detail here for legal reasons because the case is still active. Paulette was not charged. The investigation concluded she genuinely hadn't known, or at least couldn't be proven to have known. I believe that's true. I've thought about it a lot, and I think she's a woman who trusted her son in the same way my dad trusted him, which is to say completely and without sufficient reason. Dad is doing better. His new doctor adjusted his medications properly, and within 6 weeks he was sleeping through the night again. He's not back to jogging. Maybe he'll get there, maybe he won't. But last week he called me to say he'd walked 1.5 miles and felt fine, and I could hear in his voice that he was genuinely proud of himself. The morning after the arrests, I drove by Dad's house before work. It was early, barely past 7, and the street was quiet and gold-lit, in the way mornings are in May in North Carolina. I let myself in, and Dad was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, and he looked up when I came in and said, I made a pot. I poured myself a cup and sat across from him. We didn't say much. The kitchen was just the kitchen. The wall calendar he'd had for years. The small ceramic rooster Aurelie had given him as a housewarming gift a decade ago. The window above the sink, looking out at the backyard where the azaleas were starting to bloom. Thank you, he said after a while. You would have done the same for me. I know. He looked at his coffee. But thank you anyway. I'm not going to tell you everything is neat now because it's not. Divorce proceedings between Dad and Paulette have been complicated and sad, and I've watched my dad grieve the marriage, even while knowing it was necessary to end it. There's therapy. There's a lot of paperwork. There are days when he's tired in a way that goes deeper than physical. But here's what I know. He's still here. And I caught it. And orally, when I told her what happened, everything, the whole of it, nodded slowly and said, I know a wrong thing when I see one through a window. Then she went inside and came back out with a container of the best pound cake I have ever eaten in my life, and we sat on her porch until the sun went down. That's not a fairy tale ending, but it's a real one. And sometimes that's worth more.